Imagine living in a country where you have absolutely no say in how your country is run. The leader makes the rules. The leader decides the laws. And if you do not like those rules, well, that is just too bad. For most of human history, that was normal. Kings ruled kingdoms, emperors controlled empires, and ordinary people had almost no voice in government. But over time, people began asking a powerful question. What if the people themselves could choose their leaders? Hey friends, welcome back to another English shadowing practice. I am Nathan here with you. Just a quick reminder, listening is great, but speaking is where the real progress happens. So as you follow along, repeat whatever feels comfortable. You do not have to repeat every single sentence. Catch what you can, pause when you need to, and try saying parts out loud in your own rhythm. Everything here is kept short and clear so it is easier to follow. Do not stress about being perfect. Progress comes from repetition, not perfection. So, let us start. That simple idea is the heart of democracy. The word democracy comes from ancient Greek. It combines two words, demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power or rule. So democracy literally means rule by the people. Instead of one king or dictator making all the decisions, the people in a country have the power to choose who leads them. Today, democracy is one of the most common political systems in the world. Countries like the United States, India, Germany, Japan, Canada, and many others use democratic systems in different ways. But the core idea is always the same. Leaders get their authority from the people. Now, of course, millions of people cannot all sit in one giant meeting and vote on every decision. Imagine trying to organize that. The meeting would probably last forever, and no one would agree on where to get lunch. So instead, most democracies use something called representative democracy. In a representative democracy, people vote for representatives who make decisions on their behalf. These representatives could be members of parliament, Congress, or other legislative bodies. In simple terms, the public chooses the people who will help run the country. One of the most important features of democracy is elections. Elections are regular events where citizens vote to choose their leaders. Sometimes these elections happen every 4 or 5 years, depending on the country. During elections, political candidates campaign to convince people they are the best choice. They give speeches, share their ideas, and try to win public support. But democracy is not just about voting. If that were the only rule, things could become chaotic very quickly. Imagine a situation where a leader wins an election and then decides to ignore the law or stay in power forever. That would defeat the purpose of democracy. So democracies usually include several important principles that protect the system. One of these principles is the rule of law. This means that everyone must follow the law, even the leaders. Presidents, prime ministers, and government officials are not supposed to be above the law. Another key principle is freedom of speech. In a democracy, people should be able to express their opinions without fear of punishment. Citizens can criticize their leaders, discuss political ideas, and debate the future of their country. Democracy also relies on free media, meaning journalists and news organizations can report information without government control. This helps people stay informed about what their leaders are doing. All of these elements work together to create a system where power ultimately belongs to the people. But democracy did not appear overnight. It took thousands of years of experiments, struggles, and sometimes even revolutions for the idea to spread across the world. To understand how democracy really began, we have to travel back in time to ancient Greece, where one of the first democratic systems in history was born. To understand democracy, we have to travel back about 2,500 years to a place called Athens, one of the most famous cities of ancient Greece. Today, Athens is the capital of Greece, but in ancient times it was an independent city-state, meaning it had its own government, army, and laws. Around 500 BC, something unusual started happening in Athens. Instead of being ruled by a king or a small group of powerful families, the city began experimenting with a new idea, allowing citizens to participate directly in political decisions. This early system is often called direct democracy. In Athens, citizens would gather in a large public assembly and vote on important issues themselves. They did not vote for representatives the way most modern democracies do. Instead, they voted directly on laws, war decisions, and other policies. Now imagine a huge open meeting where thousands of people stand together debating political questions. Some historians say as many as 6,000 citizens could attend these assemblies. People would give speeches, argue their ideas, and then vote. It sounds exciting, but it also sounds like it could get a little loud. However, there was one big problem with this early democracy. Not everyone was allowed to participate. In fact, only a small part of the population had voting rights. Women could not vote. Slaves could not vote. Foreign residents could not vote. Only free adult men who were citizens of Athens were allowed to participate in the political system. So while Athens created one of the first democratic experiments in history, it was still very limited compared to modern standards. Even so, the idea that ordinary citizens could take part in government was revolutionary. For the first time, people began imagining a society where power did not belong only to kings or emperors. But democracy did not spread quickly after Athens. In fact, for many centuries, most of the world returned to systems ruled by kings, emperors, or powerful elites. Large empires like the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and later medieval kingdoms were controlled by rulers who inherited power through family lines. It was not until much later that democratic ideas began to reappear. One important step came in 1215 in England with a document known as the Magna Carta. This agreement forced the English king to accept limits on his power. The Magna Carta established the idea that even a king must follow certain laws. While it was not a full democracy, it planted an important seed, the idea that rulers should not have unlimited authority. Then, several centuries later, a wave of political change swept through Europe and the Americas. In 1776, the American colonies declared independence from Britain and created a new government based on democratic ideas. The United States Constitution established elections, representative government, and a system designed to prevent too much power from being concentrated in one place. A few years later, in 1789, the French Revolution exploded with a powerful message: liberty, equality, and popular sovereignty. In other words, the people, not kings, should hold political power. These events helped spread democratic ideas around the world. But building democratic systems was not always smooth or peaceful. Many countries experienced long struggles before achieving stable democratic governments. Some nations tried democracy, lost it, and then rebuilt it again years later. Even today, democracy continues to evolve and change as societies search for better ways to represent the will of the people. And that raises an interesting question. How does modern democracy actually work today? Because while the idea of rule by the people sounds simple, running a democratic country in the modern world involves many different institutions, rules, and safeguards designed to keep the system fair. So far, we have talked about the idea of democracy and where it began. But modern countries are much larger than ancient Athens. Some democracies today have tens or even hundreds of millions of citizens. Obviously, it would be impossible for everyone to gather in one giant stadium and vote on every decision. First of all, the meeting would take forever. Second, someone would probably bring snacks and distract everyone. Because of this, most modern democracies use a system called representative democracy. In this system, citizens vote for people who represent them in government. These representatives help create laws, debate policies, and make decisions about how the country should be run. The idea is that the representatives act on behalf of the voters who elected them. For example, in many countries, people vote for members of parliament or Congress. These elected officials then meet regularly to discuss laws, budgets, taxes, and other national issues. If citizens feel their representatives are doing a good job, they can vote for them again in the next election. If not, they can vote for someone else. Elections are one of the most important parts of democracy. They allow people to peacefully change their leaders. Instead of revolutions or coups, voters simply go to the ballot box and choose new leadership. But democracy also needs rules that prevent too much power from being concentrated in one place. If one person or one group controlled everything, the system could easily turn into something closer to a dictatorship. That is why many democracies use something called separation of powers. This idea divides government into different branches, each with its own responsibilities. While different countries organize their governments differently, many democracies have three main branches. The first is the legislative branch, which creates laws. In countries like the United States, this branch is called Congress. In other countries, it may be called Parliament or a National Assembly. The second is the executive branch, which carries out and enforces the laws. This branch is usually led by a president or a prime minister. The third is the judicial branch, which interprets the laws and ensures they follow the Constitution. Judges and courts help resolve disputes and protect citizens' rights. The purpose of separating these powers is to create checks and balances. In simple terms, each branch can limit the power of the others. This makes it harder for any one leader to become too powerful. Another important feature of democracy is political competition. In many democratic countries, different political parties compete for votes. Each party has its own ideas about how the country should be run. Some parties focus more on economic growth, others focus more on social programs, and others prioritize different policies. During election periods, candidates and parties present their ideas to the public. They hold debates, campaign events, and advertisements to convince voters. Sometimes these campaigns can get intense, and sometimes they can get a little dramatic too. But that debate is actually part of democracy's strength. The system encourages discussion, disagreement, and compromise. Of course, democracy is not perfect. Elections can be messy. Politicians argue. People disagree strongly about policies. But the goal of democracy is not to eliminate disagreement. The goal is to create a peaceful system where disagreements can be resolved through discussion and voting instead of violence. Even with all its challenges, democracy has become one of the most widely used forms of government in the modern world. But like any system, democracy also has strengths and weaknesses, and understanding both is important for seeing the full picture. By now, the basic idea of democracy is pretty clear. Citizens vote for their leaders, laws apply to everyone, and power is spread across different institutions to prevent any one person from controlling everything. But if democracy is so popular around the world, an important question still remains. Why do people support it so strongly? One of the biggest reasons is freedom. In democratic systems, citizens usually have important rights and freedoms that allow them to participate in society without fear. These include freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the right to protest or express political opinions. In many democratic countries, people can criticize their leaders openly without being arrested for it. That might sound normal today, but in many parts of the world and in many periods of history, criticizing a ruler could be extremely dangerous. Another major advantage of democracy is peaceful transfer of power. In many democratic countries, leaders serve for a limited amount of time. When their term ends, new elections are held, and voters decide who should lead next. Instead of violent power struggles, leadership can change simply through voting. That process has helped many societies avoid the kinds of political instability that often occurred in the past. Democracy also allows citizens to influence public policy. When people vote, participate in political discussions, or organize movements, they can push governments to change laws and improve society. Many major social changes in history, such as expanded voting rights, civil rights movements, and labor protections, were achieved through democratic participation. Rights, movements, and labor protections happened because ordinary people used democratic systems to demand change. Of course, democracy also has its challenges. One common criticism is that democratic decision-making can be slow. Because leaders must debate policies, negotiate with opponents, and gain public support, passing laws can take time. Sometimes governments argue for months or even years before agreeing on major decisions. For people who want quick solutions, this process can feel frustrating. Another challenge is political polarization. In democratic societies, people often have strong and very different opinions about how their country should be run. These disagreements can sometimes become intense, especially during elections. Political parties may compete fiercely, and debates can become heated. There is also the risk of misinformation. In a system where citizens rely on information to make decisions, false or misleading information can influence public opinion. That is why many democracies emphasize the importance of independent media, education, and open discussion. Despite these challenges, democracy remains one of the most widely supported systems of government in the modern world. Over the past century, more and more countries have adopted democratic institutions, and many people believe that having a voice in government is a fundamental human right. But democracy is not something that automatically works perfectly forever. It requires participation, responsibility, and constant effort from citizens. Voting, staying informed, and engaging in public discussions are all part of keeping a democratic system healthy. In many ways, democracy is less like a finished machine and more like an ongoing project. Each generation continues shaping the system, improving it, and sometimes correcting its mistakes. And that may be the most important idea behind democracy, the belief that the people themselves should always have the power to shape the future of their society. Because at its core, democracy is built on a simple but powerful principle: the government belongs to the people. All right. If you made it through this shadowing session today, that already says something about your discipline. This repetition and consistency combination might look boring on paper, but it is one of the most powerful ways to build fluent, natural English. Keep showing up like this, and your brain will slowly adapt. Trust the process. If this helped even a little, consider liking the video or subscribing. It lets me know these sessions are actually making a difference. We will catch up again soon. Take care till then.